everybody, and today we are filming my check-in of my series progress. I'm going to be doing the way that I did last year, so I'm just going to go chronologically through the time period that we're talking about and kind of writing down which ones I started, which ones I continued, which ones I completed, which ones I DNF'd throughout the year, and then we'll kind of take a look at the tally. It's more work for me in editing, but hey, I'm always making life easiest for filming me. So let's go. The time period that we're looking at is from July 2023 up until the June 2024 included. This is a time frame that I'm taking into account for this video every single year. So if you want to see past experiences from the past time periods, then you can go back to more or less a year ago and you'll find the same video depending on how long it took me to film and edit it. But so let's go and have a look in Storygraph what I have been reading in that time period. Alright, so in that entire time period I read 121 books, and so let's see how many of those actually had an impact on the books on the series count. So I'm gonna have to scroll all the way down, which is gonna take like 5 minutes. So logistically speaking, I'm always wondering whether I should if I've started a series but I've also continued in the series, should I count it to both started and continued? If I continued and completed, is it continued and completed, or is it just completed? If I've continued and then DNF'd, should that be continuing? Do I count the individual books that I continue? Do I count the entire series as one? So I'm going to be doing it via individual books, which might give a wrong impression. Should I just do it by series? I'll try to do it by series, but that can potentially be more logistically challenging. But so in the month of July 2023, I started The Black Coast, which is the first book in the God King Chronicles by Mike Brooks, which is a series I started and have yet to continue. Don't get me wrong, I did really enjoy this one. This is a book about basically the clash of two cultures. You have a seaside town, and then you have a sort of seafaring society, a society of basically how do you call those people who basically come into different settlements, raid the place, get everything that they need and return back to their sort of own city town thingy. And basically 1 year they decide that they are not just going to go there, raid the town and disappear again. They want to go in there, settle down and live a steady life. And so it's about the compromises between these two cultures, the clash between two different ways of life. And I really enjoyed that because I thought that that was a really interesting sort of situation to look at, something that I haven't seen much in other fantasy series, for example. Next up, I also read Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, which is the first in a series. It's the first in the Earthseed series. It was my first Octavia E. Butler. I do feel like I want to reread it and read it with the physical book on hand, though I will say that I have since read another Octavia E. Butler, which I also listened to, and I feel that Parable of the Sower, my full attention was not on it, or I felt like it wasn't grabbing my full attention, and I originally thought that that was just an audiobook issue. But with Kindred I didn't have that at all. I was completely sucked in. So I don't know whether it's just a story that suits me less, whether it was just the phase my brain was in or anything like that, but I feel like I do want to reread Parable of the Sower and then go into her other works from there. Apparently this is a series in which we can count that as DNF, which is The Martian by Andy Weir. This is a sci-fi book about a guy who gets left behind on Mars and has to find a way to survive there. I really love the movie, but I really don't like the writing style of Andy Weir. Is very science focused, which I don't think is per se the issue, but I feel like a lot of it is just plots written in order to be able to explain science like all the author really wants to do is be able to explain science, and he's just using the plot to be able to do that. So this is a reread originally. We will come back to this later on in the video, so I'll not mention it now. Then I also didn't know that this was a series in which we can also consider it a DNF, which is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. S.T. Gibson is a author who just her writing style does not work for me. So this is a Dracula retelling, or a retelling of Dracula's story from the perspective of the brides of Dracula, but the writing style is just too flowery for me. I cannot get along with a writing style like that. Next up, we started a series. This is not going well, guys. We started Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a series of like novellas. Maybe that the last one is a little bit longer than the first ones, but definitely the first one is definitely just a novella. And I forgot much about this. It's a girl from a sort of like more like, so it's African setting, I believe. It's a girl from a more sort of like tribal background who goes off to study at a sort of like prestigious university, and it's a lot about the lack of understanding and will to understand from the people there of her and her culture and her identity. That's all I really remember about it, but I do remember like really loving it, and why haven't I continued, you know, because these are just novellas. I could easily fit them in, right? Then a series that we will count now, two series that we can count as DNFs. So I've only started a DNF series so far, a good start. So I did read a few volumes of these. So that would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. So I read Buffy the Vampire Slayer Volume 3, Angel Volume 2, and then I've probably read a few others of these sort of like crossover series. But ultimately, I just don't like these enough. Like, they're not as good as the series Buffy, the TV series Buffy. And so reading them just makes me think of like, no, yeah, it doesn't stand up to the quality that is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series. This is in principle a series, so I guess I should also consider it a DNF, and that is Lumberjanes, which is another graphic novel, which is like a series of like some girls at camp. And I will say that like if this were to once again be the group read for Camp Enchanted next time around, I wouldn't mind picking it back up. You know, it wasn't a chore, but it's also not something that really did much for me, and not something I would have picked up if it weren't for that. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree started. I definitely wanted to continue with that one, but I also feel like, you know, there's no hurry for me to pick up the second one. Most likely I'm going to be picking it up somewhere in the fall, which is like the perfect time to pick up a book like this. So this is like a cozy fantasy in which we're following a mercenary who has like left behind a mercenary life to settle down and start a coffee shop. And I think the second one is more or less the same concept with maybe different characters, with a bookshop being started. So now we have a few Buffys, which I didn't talk about. Then started, but also I couldn't continue yet. And that would be Flesh and False Gods by Chloe Gong. First book being Immortal Longings. When the second book comes out, I will definitely be continuing it. A lot of people have disliked this book. A lot of people have huge problems with part of its concept. But I, in principle, think that that is just really interesting about this world. So this is a world in which we have a sort of like yearly, I think, competition, and yearly sort of like games that it can be seen as like, you know, like gladiator type of situation, or like the Hunger Games, but it takes place throughout the city. So it's not taking place in like an isolated arena or anything like that. And so people take part in this, and they have the power to jump into other bodies. And the idea is that, you know, you don't need permission for that or anything like that. And that's what makes these games so brutal, because jumping into another body, if like right before you die, means that your opponent will probably like kill the body that you were in before. And so it leads to a lot of casualties of innocent people in the town. However, at the same time, the townspeople really love these games and just like really live for the gore and violence of it. And we are following a girl who used to be the princess of this world, but then she had to go into hiding, and now she is secretly plotting along with a high member of the society, I think a prince, in order to try and win these games, because that will give her the opportunity to stand in front of the emperor and assassinate him. I really enjoyed it. Next up, another one I started. Every single year it goes like this. Every year I think like, okay, right? But it's totally not the case. So The Masterful Cat is Depressed Again Today by Hitsuzi Yamada. So this is a manga. I've only read the first one so far. I did really enjoy it and I do want to continue, but it's also not really priority for me. Alright, we are in August. And this is a series I continued, and I have also, I started it in August? Oh no, this is the start, okay. So I started this and I have continued as well this year, but I guess I can only count it for started if I'm going to count them as one thing, right? So I started Kushil's Legacy, the Imriel trilogy. So this is the second trilogy in the Kushil universe. Kushil universe is like a series that is basically like historical fantasy, very light on the magic in it, but it's basically a sort of like alternate version of our historical world. But the society that we're following is one that like sees love as one like its highest pillar, and so there's much more freedom around love, sex and sexual expression than there is in our present day society. And we're following a girl called Fedre, who is trained to be a courtesan and a spy to some extent, and we're following her along her journey. Second series follows a character that we meet at the end of the Fedre trilogy, so I cannot really talk about it. So I have started the second trilogy and read the second book, and I am in the midst of reading the third book, so I'm in the midst of completing this series, but I have not yet completed it. Another one that I guess we need to be DNFing because I didn't know this was a series, and that is Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, which for me it just didn't work very well. I know a lot of people like it, but for me it was just a little bit boring, a little bit meh. Not the best Japanese fiction that I've read, and so by comparison it doesn't really do much for me. I've completed a series, guys. End of August I completed the Lifeship Trader series by Robin Hobb. It's been so long already. I kind of want to do like a Hobb series per year, but that would mean that I definitely need to get my act together and do start the next series like in September or something like that, because yeah, time's ticking. So Ship of Destiny I read in August. Lifeship Trader series is a series in which we're looking at this world where if 3 generations of captains die aboard the ship, then the ship comes to life. And we are at the dawn of that being about to happen, and something goes awry. I really love this series. I gave every book in this series 5 stars. Then completed, no, not completed, right? That's continued. Continued, but like up to date, there is no further book out yet, is The Shroud of Prophecy by Kel Kate. This is the book that I reread that I didn't mention earlier. This is a fantasy series that looks at what if the Chosen One dies. So we're following the best friend of the Chosen One, who kind of has to take up the mantle of his deceased comrade when he dies like 5 minutes into the book. I really enjoy Kel Kate. I will say I love her other series more, and this second book definitely disappointed me a little bit, so I would want to reread it when the third one comes out and see if maybe the physical experience works better with me here, but typically Kel Kate works better with me on audio, so I also then started my reread of the other Kel Kate series, which I will get to later within the year. Let's see, did I read any other series? Then in September, is this the final book in that series? Yes, right? Yeah, so this is completed. I completed Mistborn Era 2 by Brandon Sanderson by reading The Lost Metal. Not really gonna say much about Mistborn, I think, because is there much that I can say? Like, Mistborn Era 2 takes place 200 years or so after Mistborn Era 1. The events and the characters from Mistborn Era 1 have passed down into, like, legends, and we are now following a detective duo that kind of solves crimes. If you know me, you know I don't like murder mystery storylines, so all the books in Mistborn Era 2 have not really worked for me. Like, The Lost Metal probably still had a pretty decent rating, considering, like, I wouldn't give that now, I guess, like a 3.5 rating. Completed in September. Is it already so long ago? In September I completed He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan, thus completing the Radiant Emperor duology. This second one also was a little bit of a letdown, which of course She Who Became the Sun was like a 5-star for me. I absolutely adored that book. So to some extent there was the risk, of course, of the second one not reaching that same height. I just of course would have loved to have seen things differently, and maybe it also could have benefited from me rereading She Who Became the Sun before going into He Who Drowned the World, because I did have quite some difficulties in kind of figuring out again what had happened within book one, as the book kind of like jumped straight in. So whereas I kind of oftentimes I won't reread the first book, because I feel like a lot of times the authors kind of put in a sort of like recap through like the first few chapters of the book, which wasn't the case here, and so I should have probably reread the first book in order to dive into this one. I continued, and I hope that I'll still finish within this year, because it was definitely the intention, but I continued The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart, which is a series in which we're looking at a daughter of an emperor who is basically in a toxic relationship with her father, who's being trained to use bone shard magic, which basically takes bones of people and it places them in sort of like constructs to animate them. And it's about like overthrowing the empire, I guess, right? Another one I DNF'd is The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. This was too much of the murder mystery vibe going on for it, so it didn't really work for me. This is a book that continued in a series, but I am DNFing this series because this series should have been done like ages ago, and that is Before We Say Goodbye. So the fourth book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This takes the concept of you can travel back in time, but you cannot change anything in the past. So why would you go back in time? And while I enjoy the concept and I enjoyed the first two books of this concept has run dry. You know, there's nothing you can do with this anymore. Like, sure, there are slight variations with the stories, but there hasn't been anything like new, fresh in the last two books, so I feel like there's no reason to continue. And I know a fifth one is coming, and I'm like, no, this is just like milking people for their money. It isn't really worth my time anymore. In October, I continued with the Ending Fire trilogy by Sarah El Arifi. The final book is going to come out, I think next month for that, or maybe even later, maybe in September. This is a series in which we're looking at a society that is segregated by the color of their blood. And basically we have a sort of like swap at birds, not really, but more or less type of situation. So we're following two characters who are living the life of somebody with a different type of blood color, and one of them is trying to infiltrate the high society in order to try and take the system down. I like take the system down books, clearly. Then I continued, and now I'm really not sure whether there is anything new already in that, but I read Saga Volume 10. I don't think there's already a Volume 11, right? Which is a sci-fi series basically about star-crossed lovers who have to disappear into the galaxy in order to fight for their family's right to survive. I completed... it depends how you see it, but I completed Celestial Kingdom by Su Lin Tan in November by reading Heart of the Sun Warrior. There is a companion sort of short story collection which I have also read in the meantime, but I already kind of completed here. This is a series about a secret daughter to the moon goddess who has to go to the heart of the empire where she has to kind of hide her real identity to participate in this sort of competition to get the emperor's boon and ask for her mother's release from her imprisonment. I completed the Vine Witch series by Luann G. Smith. These are a series of companion series, feel more like urban fantasy-esque, though it is set in a more historical time period. Somewhat more cozy. In the first one we have this vine witch, a witch who cultivates the vines to make wine, and she has just like been released from like a 10-year curse in which she was trapped in the body of a frog, and when she returns to her vineyard she finds that a human is now the owner of the vineyard, and she kind of has to clash with him about how to manage the vineyard. I think the first one is the best one in this one. The second and third one just work not as well for me, especially the third one just was really a struggle for me to get through. If the frame slightly changed, it's because my battery died on me, and this is a battery that isn't fully charged, so let's hope it makes it until the end of this video. But so, I also read The Advantage of Amina al-Sarafi, which is a series that follows a little bit of an older protagonist. It's a female pirate who's kind of retired. She's no longer living that life, but then she's pulled in for one last job. Really enjoyed this one, and very much looking forward to the sequel. This apparently is a trilogy, which means I also DNF'd it. This is the Scattered All Over the Earth trilogy by Yoko Tawada, which I DNF'd. There's much more DNF in here than I had anticipated. This is a series in which we're following a woman who thinks she is the last person to speak Japanese on the world, and she's kind of traveling around trying to find another person. And yeah, this one I really cannot tell you what happened in this one anymore, but it definitely wasn't what I had anticipated it being. I also started a reread for the Murderbot Diaries at that point in time, more or less, and so that is a series that I can already tell you guys that I continued. I am up to, I still need to read the final one, I think, System Collapse, but I also feel like I need to reread the series. Murderbot Diaries is a series in which we're following a robot who has hacked his, governing module, and so he's basically a free agent now, but he's using that time to just sit around and watch TV. He doesn't like to interact with people. He has a lot of social anxiety, but then shit goes down and he has to defend the people on his ship. At this point in time I feel like I need to reread it, and reread it physically for once, because I feel like a lot of the I'm always following what's going on in the moment, but a lot of it's starting to build off of earlier events, and I just don't have the memory to remember those things, and so I should reread it in order to kind of figure out again how it all interconnects to one another. This is not your sort of case of the week type of story. It feels like that, but it definitely is building off of a similar backgrounds. Then I also continued, but this is also something that I feel didn't really work well in the audiobook form for me, is I continued the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer by reading Authority, but honest to God, do I know what happened in that book? Hardly. So it's one that I'm also wondering, is it worthwhile me completing it now? Shouldn't I just either go back and reread it, or just give up on it, try something else by Jeff Vandermeer first and see if I have the same sort of feeling about it, where I'm just I'm not really it isn't really going into my brain, in which case it isn't worth me rereading. And if I read something else by him and feel okay, this is really working better for me, then I might revisit it. Then I reread and continued and completed the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington, so we can put this in the completed section. So this is a trilogy in which we are looking at these three friends who are at a sort of magic academy. They have to take a test to prove that they can control their magic, because magic is very much a dangerous entity, and in this world it is very rigorously bound to these rules and regulations, because in the past magic was being misused by the gifted, and so now they are magically bound from hurting non-gifted people. And so one of our friends is actually feeling like he might not pass this test because he hasn't been able to use his magic since first awakening to the knowledge that he was a gifted. And so he's very much fearing that this test will be the end for him, that he will have his magic stripped from him and live as a shadow, which is like the lowest of the low. People very much look down upon them. But right before the test, he is kind of given an alternate path, an alternate quest, and he has some revelations made about who he might be. Then I reread and continued with the God Killer series, which is called The Fallen Gods by Hannah Kaner. Second one is the last one out so far, so I couldn't complete it, but I am up to speed with that one. And in that one we were looking at a God Killer who is traveling the lands, trying to hunt down and kill as many gods as she can. In this world, gods grow more and more stronger the more people venerate them and worship them, and so god killers go around trying to hunt down, track gods and like destroy their altars. DNF for Spin Saga by Robert Charles Wilson, sci-fi series. Don't know much about it because I didn't get all that, like I got far, but I didn't get far enough in to actually know what the sci-fi element is or to know like the explanation for it. At one point in time there's just like something hanging in the atmosphere or something like that, I think, or like there's a bubble around the atmosphere or something like that. I really don't remember. This is very much character focused, but I also didn't care about the characters, so typically character focus works better for me, but in this case I was just like, I don't care about these characters at all, and so if it is a character focused book that has characters that I don't care about, then it's definitely not working for me. Then, so I haven't mentioned, so as I was saying, I was rereading King's Dark Tidings, but I also caught up to it, so this is a continued. I'm caught up at this point in time. I've read the 5th and final book in King's Dark Tidings. King's Dark Tidings is one of my favorite series. It's definitely not like the most amazing series out there. It doesn't have the best themes in it, the best characters, the best plot or whatever. It's just like one of those series that I just devour. And it's a series in which we're looking at Reskin, who is a boy who at a young age was taken from his home and trained to be an assassin, and right before graduating he basically has to kill all of his sort of like trainers, and in the process his masters also end up dead, and so he is left with nobody to tell him what he was being trained for, with nobody left to give him guidance about what he should be doing next. Then I continued The Forever Desert by Moses Ozi Otomi. I'm pretty sure that there's more to come within this series, so I'm just going to say continued. In the first one we followed a boy who lived in a desert city where access to water was very restricted, and it was this outside force who gave them water but never enough, and so young people would, before the age of 13, very frequently step out into the wide world, into the desert on the search for water, but none of them ever returned. And our young protagonist is also stepping out into the desert to figure out if he can find water. Really great series. Like, both books in the series I've so far given 5 stars, and they're also novellas, so they're quick reads as well. Then I've started, and within this time frame, I have to say that we've just started this because I am about to complete it, but this time frame does not count, and that is the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams, in which we're following a sort of like collapsed society, which is also a trope that I quite enjoyed. So we have the Abhorrent Society, which is sort of like a vampirical race who had this sort of like mother tree that was nurturing and providing for them, but then that tree kind of withered and died, and they had to feed off of human blood. However, human blood then gave them a sort of sickness referred to as the Crimson Flux. And now an enemy is about to reawaken, and without the help of their beloved tree, how will they continue? In March I started and DNF'd, so I'm going to count it as a DNF. The Just at Air by Sarah Hashem. So I did finish this book, but I'm not continuing on with the series, so I will count it in the DNF pile. This is a series in which we're looking at this sort of like destroyed society, and we have the sort of like crown princess of that society who's basically living in hiding now, and then she's found by the crown prince or the general of the society that destroyed her society, and they have to work together. It's an enemies to lovers, but like I feel like there's no really reason for them to become lovers based on how poorly, like the background that they have and how poorly he treats her. Like, why is she falling in love with this guy? So that one just really annoyed me. And then we have the Delicate Dream Department Store by Mie Lee. This is one that I started. I don't actually think that the second book is translated yet. And this is a speculative book about the like commerce of dreaming, and so it is taking place in this sort of like fictional world where people who dream go there to then buy dreams. And so the protagonist that we're following is somebody who is working at the dream department store, and her job is to kind of find the right dream for the right people, basically. And so the book kind of explores like what type of dreams that people need, and like what's dreams that you might think are worthless, like how they can be of use to certain people in certain situations. Then I started the Smokesmith series by João F. Silva, with first book being Seeds of War, and I did really enjoy it. I was originally like unsure whether I really wanted to continue, because it was also not like it was like a total sell for me. It was a little bit of a difficult one for me to get through, but on the other hand I also feel like it was, I'm gonna put myself a little bit closer, but on the other hand it also did really, like at the end I definitely wanted to continue, and I definitely wanted to, like, I didn't want to put it down in the sense of I didn't want to DNF it while reading it, even though I was kind of struggling with it pacing wise, because I did want to know what was going to happen in a certain storyline, for example. So that is like kind of making me think that at the very least I have the prequel novella for it, so I'll definitely read that, but I kind of think I'll probably continue with this series because there's enough sort of like curiosity on my end to see where the story is going. So this is a story in which we're following multiple characters, and like the most like interesting hook I can give probably is that one of them is kind of a character who's pretending to be a god in order for him to have the resources to investigate a possible cure for an illness that he has contracted. So that, I think, is the best hook into the story. Then another one that I started and I will count as a DNF is Feybound by Sarah El Arifi. As I said, I mentioned the Ending Fires trilogy by her earlier, which I really enjoyed, but this one, Feybound, doesn't really work for me, and I guess because a lot of it is about like romantic pining, and I don't mind some romance in the background, and I don't even always mind romance in the front, but when it's like slow burn, will they, won't they, enemies to lovers, that type of thing, that rarely works for me. There are cases that I can think of, but a lot of the times it just frustrates me, and in this book the romance really frustrated me. A lot of the times I was just like, oh, get on with it already. Next up we have one that I started, which is To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monakil Blackgoose, series name None She Wasted. It's the first book in that. This is a Native American author, and this book didn't really live up to my expectations for it because I had a different expectation for what it is. So it's more slice of life fantasy. I was expecting it to be more sort of epic high fantasy, in which we're looking at a Native American girl who basically is the first Native American in a very long time. I'm calling them Native American. It's not necessarily that the case that this is America that is, but I mean, it's not called like that, but it is that. And so we have this Native American girl who basically has just had a dragon awaken to her, and she's the first one in a few generations in which a dragon has awoken to her, and so none of her people actually have the knowledge that they can pass down to her about how she can control her dragon, how she can take care of her dragon. So she has to go to the colonizers academy to learn how to take care and control her dragon. And the book is very much about how they are constantly trying to teach her how the way that she thinks, the way that she acts is wrong, and her fighting against that, and her kind of being like, nope, I'm not going to go with that. And I really appreciate the fact that she is very firm in her understanding that, you know, just because they think it's the right way to do things, or just because they think that they have the right way of thinking, that does not mean that she has to follow along with that, and that does not mean that she has to like revalue herself and like lower her own worth. But ultimately this is just really slice of life, and I was kind of hoping it was building to something massive, which it didn't. So if I had gone in with different expectations, it might have also worked out a little bit differently. Alright, so now my camera overheated. Let's hope we can get to the final section of this video, because I'm in May, chronologically speaking, so I'm almost there. Just hang in there for a little bit longer. So the Unbroken had sort of like, you know, annoying romance for me. Like it annoyed me, and the characters were so stupid all of the time. So there was a lot of aggravation on my end about the decisions and the actions of the characters. And so I am hoping, based off of what I've heard other people say, I'm hoping that this is just mainly a book 1 thing, and that in book 2 I'm gonna see a turnaround. And if not, then I'm DNFing this series. And then I reread and completed the Rook and Roll series by M.A. Carrick, and I love this series. I love it. I will say that like I mainly love book 2, but I think I also love book 1 after reading it, and book 3 was a little bit of a letdown. Maybe because I read them so close together, and like I had that sort of like huge anticipation for book 3 because of having just loved book 2, and maybe if I had some time in between there, I would have felt differently about book 3. But book 3, to some extent, I was just like, yeah, I mean, not that. That makes it sound worse than it is. But book 3 was like, it was good, it just wasn't great the way that the second book had been. This is a series in which we're following a con artist who used to be part of a criminal gang. She killed the sort of like leader of the gang as she was like manipulating the children and like hurting her brother and sister, and she had to flee as a consequence of that. But now she is back, making her way into the city, calling her way into a wealthy household, trying to steal their money without realizing that this household is on the brink of financial ruin. Really love this. The characters in this one, I love all the characters in here. And then I started and completed, so what do I count that for? Then I need to count double, right? I feel like I need to count that double, because otherwise it doesn't, like, it's unfair to the statistics, right? So I'm counting that one double, and that is the Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. This is a graphic novel trilogy about these dragons with tea leaves that you can boil to have tea, and then those teas kind of share memories of the dragon and its owner. So it's a wholesome graphic novel series. And yes, I DNF'd the Warring Gods series by Gabriela Romero La Cruz. So I read the first book within this series, The Sun and the Void, gave it 2.5 stars. No need to continue that. This is a series in which we're looking at, it's like Latin American inspired. We're looking at 2 characters, and honest to God, I don't even fully remember what happens in this one, because I was just so confused by the world building in this all the time, and I was so confused about like the 2 main characters. I couldn't keep them apart. And clearly we're seeing this again now, because I still am like, what happened in this book? So yeah, sorry, that's going to be my conclusion about that book. Then I completed Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. So this is a series in which we're following a young girl called Spensa, whose father was in the sort of like flight force, but he betrayed his comrades. She wants to be a fighter pilot, but the reputation of her father is held against her. I have had my ups and downs with the series. Defiant was a decent conclusion. I did enjoy it, so it is a 4-star for me, and I am glad that the series is over, to be fair. And that is it, guys. We have made it to the end of the list. That means that I have started 14 series, continued, what is this, 9, completed 9, and DNF'd 12. Honestly, the DNF is the one that surprises me the most, because I was like, yeah, I DNF'd a few series here or there, but not that much, right? And now my camera is over. But so yeah, I didn't realize how much I DNF'd throughout like a year of reading fantasy series. But it also, like, I'm not mad about that neither. It means that while for most of these I did give the entire first book a shot, or in some of these multiple books, it does mean that I am learning to step away from them if I'm not interested. And sure, some cases I step away earlier, though I don't think there were instances where I haven't even finished the first one in these examples of DNFs. A lot of them are also books that I didn't really realize that, you know, like were a series, and that, you know, I didn't love the first one enough to continue in any case. But like, yeah, I am realizing like time is precious, there's lots to read, and so if I'm not fully convinced about a book, then I shouldn't be continuing on with them, because, you know, like, what's the point? And yeah, I did complete some, I did continue some, but of course, once again, the overwhelming numbers go to started. I did still start more series than I completed, and that is the balance that we are trying to write at one point or another. I will say that throughout the year I have probably also DNF'd a few series without reading anything in them, because I did at one point kind of go through my list of like series that I'm still going through and decide to not bother with some of those anymore. So there are like less series in my entire arsenal of series that I'm reading, so to that extent, like, I probably DNF'd even more, and so I have, like, even though I started more, I have also potentially less series to get to than at the beginning of the year. Who knows? So yeah, 14 to 9, I guess we could have done worse, but still. Let's see if we can get this number turned around next year, or closer together still. Like, there's a 5 series gap in between there. Let's get that even closer. Let's see. But so yeah, with that, I'm going to end this video. Let me know your favorite series you've read this year. Like, what's the one series that if you could get me to read it, like, that would be the one that you would tell me? Or like, and if you know this number, like, how many series have you started and how many series have you completed, and what's the balance between the two? But so yeah, with that, I'm gonna leave you guys. See you guys in the next video. Bye!